Okay, there we go.
So thank you, everyone. I'll just do quick introductions. I'm Giovanna Ionnace from the Harrison Public Library, and tonight we have Janis Robinson Daly, who is a fellow ambassador of Adventures by the Book, and we're delighted to have best-selling author Piper Huguley here tonight to discuss her latest novel, American Daughters.
There it is. Yep,
There it is.
wonderful. Thanks so much, Giovanna, and thank you to the Harrison Library again for hosting us. Great that we're able to do this, to have a East Coast presence for many folks and East Coast time as well, because most of Adventures by the Book sometimes is tied to the Pacific Coast time slot. So I know Piper's down in Georgia, so hopefully the 7 o'clock time frame works for her as well. But very quickly, a little intro, and then we'll get into a few questions, and definitely want to make sure we leave room at the end for you all to put questions into the chat or to raise your hands and go ahead and ask yourselves. So Piper is the author first. Many of you have maybe already read By Her Own Design, which was a fabulous book, a book list top 100 editors choice selection for 2022, told the story of fashion designer Anne Lowe, another woman from history that we are so happy Piper brought her story forward to so many of us to learn about Anne's amazing accomplishments. And it was also named a top 100 book of 2022 in Canada by the Globe and Mail newspaper. So always nice when gets recognition across borders. Piper is also the author of Sweet Tea by Hallmark Publishing and the author of two historical romance series, Migrations of the Heart. She is a literature professor at Clark Atlanta University and blogs about history behind her novels. Tonight, we're going to be discussing her latest release, American Daughters, came out in 2024. It's the story of the decades-long interracial friendship between Alice Roosevelt and Portia Washington, the rebel teenage daughters of President Theodore Roosevelt and educator Booker T. Washington. So I'm going to kick off with Giovanna, maybe with our first question.
Oops, I muted Giovanna.
You're on mute.
Come to us.
Sorry about that. Okay, here we go again. So,
Yeah.
historical fans are always wondering what inspires an author to write a story. What inspired you to write not just a biography of two important women in history, but of their interracial friendship?
Well, two things. Hello everyone. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm deeply nerdy, and have been for some time. Even as a small child, I'd be spending my Saturdays at some library looking into some aspect of United States history. I've had a long-standing interest in the presidents and all of the trivia and minutiae surrounding the presidency. I know a lot about a lot of those things, more than your typical person would. Um, and if you might, guess or you get or whatever, sort of that's why I was kind of able to segue in with Anne Lowe and By Her Own Design, because she has a presidential connection that I had been aware of when I was a child, but it only came to full flower later whenever I saw my editor was making a call for stories. And I've been researching uh, HBCU history for a very long time as a professor at a historically Black college and university. But most pointedly, the Washington family, who I've been researching for about a decade now in terms of historical fiction stories. And I came across this story, or the knowledge of Portia and Alice's friendship, while looking at the Washington family, of which she is a member. Her one biographer mentioned it, And her obituary published in the Washington Post mentions it. And then I realized because of my presidential nerdiness that I knew, like I said, when I was a child growing up, knowing growing up that Alice Roosevelt Longworth was still alive. Um, I, just was amazed at that because they both lived till they were very old ladies. Portia died like 2 years before Alice did, actually. But one of Alice's biographies, part of my ongoing interest in presidential history, um, mentions it. Only one. All the other ones, the one I consider the most comprehensive, the Stacy Schiff biography, mentions Alice talking about Portia as her compatriot, which for me is a very important word. Once I was able to put those things together to realize just how much they had in common with one another, and that of course they would be friends, but for the aspect of the fact they came from different races. And, sort of my underlying title as I was working on it was the white princess of America and the black princess of America were friends, and so um and when I saw in another part of social media a survey that had been released that asked people the question about if they had a friendship of someone from another race, I saw 90% of white people said no, they didn't. And 78% of Black people said no, they didn't. So I thought that when I came upon this interesting uh, confluence of information between the two of them, that it would be an interesting opportunity for historical fiction to fill in the gap in history that we have. As I see Dawn is asking, is there a lot written about this friendship? And no, there is not. Because, and I saw someone else had commented about this the other day, an unusual friendship for the time. Given these statistical results, it would be an unusual friendship for now, in terms of this. And so I thought this is what historical fiction can do in terms of filling in the gap. In terms of those, what I call the tent poles of factual information, to create what might have been a probable story of what would have been the first part of their friendship in terms of this. The American Daughters only goes to 1930. They were in touch. There is a lot more story in terms of their potential friendship after 1930, between 1930 and 1978 when Portia dies. But publishers do not like for authors to publish 700-page books. And I guess unless you're one of these romantasy authors, then you can do it. But for the most part, you got to keep your books to 350 pages. So the time then gets limited in terms of that. I have had other story of them being these two old ladies living in Washington, D.C., creating lots of trouble for lots of people. One day that might see daylight. I don't know, though, in terms of that. So that's my long answer to that question.
That's wonderful. I think you need to write that book, Piper. We need to see some more mature protagonists out there in literature. Coming of age, like American Daughters,
right. Yeah,
is wonderful,
true.
but
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, more mature protagonists.
we're not done yet with
Absolutely not. Absolutely
raising
not.
hell.
And they did apparently get into, like I said, this whole aspect of trouble. The whole notion, Washington, D.C. is a very southern town,
Mm.
that there were aspects of the life there that were southern in terms of integrating lunch counters and stuff. And of course, like I said, Alice, she was out there for a long time across many more presidential administrations. And part of my nerding out was going on YouTube and watching her walk into Trisha Nixon Cox's wedding in 1972. I mean, just stuff like that, and just what I do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, definitely an interesting book. So keep that on your radar and your publisher's radar.
It will do.
But let's go to the coming of age story though of Alice and Portia.
Mhm.
And really their first bond
Mhm.
occurred because they both lost their mothers at
Yeah.
such a young age. I mean, even at birth.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did have their stepmothers, but very tense relationships with
Very,
those
yeah.
stepmothers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think drove them both individually to become so independent? Without that mother or female role model,
Yeah.
they could have just, you know, dropped back into the wallflowers, right? And
Yeah.
done nothing. But
Yeah. I think another thing that Portia and Alice had in common was what I call the "daddy look at me"
Mhm.
phenomenon, and I think that's why they both were. Portia maybe to a much lesser extent. I think she knew she couldn't show out in the same way that Alice did, for racial reasons or whatever, and maybe also, just slightly, maybe the Booker seemed to be paying her slightly more attention in a way.
Yeah,
I mean, when you have TR unable to say Alice's name because
right.
that is the name of her deceased mother, that's a wow, in
Yeah.
terms of um how close they're gonna be, even though, like I'm saying, and I hope they came across it in American Daughters, lifelong admiration
Mm.
that she had, that Alice had for her father, and continued to want to uplift him and celebrate him, and also, which I think is why Alice got into the situation she got into later on with William Bora.
Yeah,
I think
right.
that had to do with Daddy. Because
Yeah,
when I saw him
right.
on YouTube, I was like, Alice, I don't know what you see in this.
And she pretty much admits that too, that he was not an
Yeah,
attractive
I
man.
had to
And
put that in there because I'm like, I'm not getting, like, what is he doing for you? Because I mean, sometimes the appeal can be like with the voice, or with something like that.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that he uplifted Daddy a lot,
yeah.
and she was able to make that connection with him.
And Booker's, obviously desire for Portia to be educated. I mean, sending her to Wellesley and sending
Hmm.
her
Hmm.
abroad to Europe. I mean, that was
Hmm.
amazing for that time.
It was amazing for that time, and even as much as Booker T. Washington gets a certain amount of, and has over the years, criticism from the Black community for what is widely believed to be his philosophy regarding Black people in labor in the United States. The fact that he sends his daughter, Portia, to these places to be educated, to Europe to be educated, to me, always conveyed that he had higher expectations of Black people in the United States, but that he saw it unfolding in a different way than, say, Du Bois, which everybody always wants to bring up their
Right.
great big clash or whatever, which to me was not as big of a clash as people make it out to be. There's always these aspects in terms of nuance in the argument, but of course, history wants to play up these extremes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I recall a quote somewhere that Teddy said, I can either manage the country or manage Alice. I can't do both.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly, exactly. And I mean, and I think that was partly her intention,
Hmm.
but she got that from him.
Right.
See, she got that from him. She was the only one of his children to get that from him. The other children with Edith all did not, they did not have the charisma and the
Mm,
sparkle and
mm,
everything that Alice got it. And what could she do with it?
Yeah.
Right? As a woman at that particular point in time is always, to me, a bit of a tragedy.
Yeah. Would
Yeah.
have been wonderful to know what her mother would have been like. Maybe that's where some of it came from.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, remember Alice says of TRs, like he has to be the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and the baby at every christening. And it's like, well, girl, that's you too.
Right.
So,
The apple didn't fall far from the tree, right?
exactly.
So a good deal of research is involved when writing historical fiction because you're obviously fictionalizing true events, true real people,
Mhm.
but it's all created by the author, by you. Now, from the inception of the idea of working on these two women.
Mhm.
From that start and all the research you probably had to uncover and review and decipher and all of that, how long did it take you to complete the research and then write American Daughters?
Well, as I'm saying, I'm cheating a little bit. I've been researching these two particular subject areas for many decades, we're talking about here in terms of some of these things. So it's not like I had to do a bunch of reading at one time. It was just me checking, seeing what has been published more recently about certain aspects of Alice, or looking into the other ways in which historical fiction, and even in one case, historical mystery author, where there's a little mystery series with her as the sleuth, in terms of that. And just seeing what the recent scholarship on her happened to be or whatever. And of course, as far as Portia was concerned, there was much since the 70s, in terms of that particular aspect that maybe might change. In terms of some of this kind of thing, which is why I love what historical fiction can do in terms of shining a spotlight on these things. So it's not really fair. I mean, oh, it took years and years. I mean, if you're looking at it in that way, it took a long time. But for the writing of the actual book, it took approximately 10 months or whatever. And I had some stoppage in that when I had some family deaths occur. So, yeah, that's about how long.
Oh,
Oops, Janice.
Janis, now you're muted.
Again. Certainly, all of that research came through, and it was amazing, all of the history that you brought in, not just going on in their lives, but around them, what they
Yes.
were what they were going through, and the political movements and all. And
Hmm.
both women were so, well presented with strong voices and well developed. I noticed in your author notes, you commented on the release of two other historical fiction novels that
Hmm.
based on famous interracial friendships. And so
Hmm.
I'm assuming you're referring to First Ladies by Marie Benedict and Christopher Murray,
Hmm.
Mary Beth Bethune, and Eleanor Roosevelt. And
Hmm.
then there was also Can't We Be Friends by Denny Bryce and Eliza Knight about Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald.
Hmm.
Did you ever consider teaming up with a white author to write Alice's sections?
No,
No?
no, I've been knowing Alice since I was 9 years old.
Okay. Well, did a great job.
And I get thanks. And I've seen Alice's, in society and all
Yeah,
this other kind of stuff in terms of the, stuff I have. So it was never. And I just have the presumption that no one else is as deeply nerdy as I am. Now, maybe that's not true, but the whole aspect in terms of finding out and all that other kind of stuff, it makes me a little bit like, I could just
yeah.
go ahead and do myself.
Great, great.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
We just have a couple more, and then we've got a few questions in the chat as well we want to make sure we get to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so getting back to the research, since
Mhm.
that's
Sure.
what most interests me, I guess, that's the question. So you had all this wealth of information, all these
Mhm.
primary resources, maybe more so for Alice than for Portia, but you had to
Right.
review it, bring it all together. Were there any pieces of information you were not able to include in the novel that you wish you had?
Well, as I said, the story goes on. It's like all of that, like when they're old ladies and, getting into all kinds of devilments. And I think the way in which, like I said, we don't have the historical record. And, one of the interesting things about it when people talk about resources and what do you have in terms of primary and secondary research and all of that other kind of stuff. The part for me that saddens me is that the fact that none of this could be documented because it's an interracial friendship. That to me is like the sort of the hovering lacuna, silent space in terms of the primary and secondary resources, whatever. So when Alice said she is my compatriot and brings her grandchildren to me. That told me a lot in terms of the fact that she was willing to speak to that and write down, as well as some of the other things that she did, to, slap down the establishment when she thought that, they were doing dumb things in terms of allowing Black people their civil rights and stuff, and some of the snarky, comments and stuff that she made in terms of that. Circumstances, situations. So we don't get any of that. So it's like all of that, like when, you think the filter's off now, right? Wait until like they're older, right? That's the stuff I couldn't get in. But like Janis said, maybe one day we'll see it.
We are looking forward to that, hopefully. So last question that I had, and then we'll go to the chat. Have you been able to visit Tuskegee University? And is Portia honored there in any way? Or is hopefully your book on the bookshelves and in the library and everything else?
Well, that I don't know about whether the book is there or not, but I've been to Tuskegee many times. It's only an hour or some from
Yeah.
Atlanta. It's not that far. So for all of like I said, I've been researching the Washington family now for more than a decade. I've made several trips to Tuskegee in terms of that. When you go on the campus, the first thing you see is the house where Booker and Margaret lived, that was built for them. But when you go onto the campus, and it really is a reflection of the people who come later are the ones who have the say, right, in terms of what goes down in terms of history. When you go through the front gates of Tuskegee, and by the way, all of Tuskegee is a national landmark because part of Booker T. Washington's building, getting the school started and getting students prepared was to have them build the campus.
Mm.
So the buildings themselves are artifacts of the students' capabilities as makers of the bricks and putting the bricks together to make buildings. Always bring this across to my students, to say they had to build their whole campus before.
But what pride they must have taken in their,
Exactly. There is
oh,
not a scrap of paper on the
mm,
ground. I mean, seriously, it is that kind of place when you go to visit Tuskegee. But when you go through the front gates, off to the right is the Margaret Murray Washington Student Center in large letters, right? She's the one who was left
mm,
to tell the tale. And so she gets a certain amount of, the other two wives, not as much at
mm,
all. And not Portia to any
not
extent.
Portia.
No. So that there is a cemetery there on the campus. And again, you have Booker's grave. It is, this large stone Washington and da, 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 da. And then Margaret's grave is not far from his. It's not with his, but it's not far. But it's also large and obvious. And the stones for Olivia and for Fanny, Portia's biological mother, are off on the side of the hill, and they're kind of crooked and mossed over. And it really is this very interesting. Um, that's what tells the tale in terms of who gets left
Yeah.
behind there. So yeah, it does reflect that. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Great. Well, I'm finding a couple of questions here related
Cool.
again to these women's, strong personalities, but they end up with the loser husbands,
They do, they do. Yes,
both of them.
yeah, I've had several readers let me know about how
Oh,
they wanted to just, yeah, for Sid, who ends up in like the most disgraceful.
and he pursued her and waited for her for so long. You would have thought he'd treat her like a queen.
Well, I'm not to excuse Sid, but like I said, the whole aspect of really his being an architect at a time when that was just not going to be
Yeah.
respected, did a number on him, really, in terms of his mental state and everything. I mean, even though I said the parts that's not included in the book, when he goes to jail and all of this other aspect, what Portia's to do about that, and um, yeah, yeah. And I mean, and down in Texas and some of these other places where some of his buildings
Mhm.
still stand or that are still a reflection of his skill as an architect, it is sad that, you have that's part of his legacy.
Yeah.
Um, as of late, students who are Black architects have embraced him, lifted him up at Drexel, where he graduated. They have a certain kind of homage that they pay to him, but I think they don't tell this part
No, no.
of the story. So. And then Nicholas Longworth, as Speaker of the House, and when I had to write this part, all of that back and forth vote with the Speaker was going on or whatever. And the interesting thing about Nicholas Longworth was that even though he presided as Speaker over Congress with a very similar narrow margin, everybody liked him. But the problem was too many people liked him.
And he wasn't shy about that.
And he was not at all shy about that. Right, exactly. But like I said, the thing I thought was most interesting about Nick was his total and complete embrace of that baby that he knew was not his, you know?
That was amazing.
That was amazing. It really was. And this little girl, from the time that, and like I said, part of the book ends in 1930, so you don't get to see how he's lifting her up and bringing her to the floor and to the cafeteria and all that stuff. He was crazy about that child.
Yeah,
Go
that was go figure. That was
go
that was
figure.
a surprise.
Yeah, go figure.
So there is another question related to the husbands, to
Mhm.
Portia's spousal abuse. You did an amazing job. Or how difficult was it to write about Portia's spousal abuse? And then the comment, you did an amazing job on depicting her shock and embarrassment.
Yeah, thank you for that, Becky. Yeah, this is what we do as writers, you have to go there in terms of that. And um it's not something that I've endured or whatever, but seeing other people witness it helps you sometimes to be able to bring some of those feelings in to so that readers can be aware, like I said, of Portia's aspect. And of course, the overarching question about Portia happens to be always like, what if she didn't come back to the United States? What if she had stayed
Yeah,
in Europe? But again, I think Daddy was here. And that was also part of her decision making, and knowing that even as he had encouraged her to these endeavors or whatever, believing that she could be over in Europe being a concert pianist, potentially marrying a white man, that would have been a bridge too far, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I thought it was also really interesting how both of them in difficult marriages, and Portia got herself out,
Yeah.
and Alice, just kind of fell back on, societal expectations about divorce, particularly in that white upper class
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
public figure
Yeah.
that she was trapped.
Yeah. She was in effect trapped, and the only thing that freed her was that Nick died. I mean, and that's the thing she was willing to um be a rebel, but only up to a point.
Mhm.
I just, always think like, oh my gosh, if she just really gone out there and ran for Congress, or
Mhm.
things,
Yeah,
what different things would have been now if, she had, parlayed her nepotism into something, not just her nepotism, her skill and her
yes,
political savvy,
yeah,
that energy that she had, that where people had called her the other Washington Monument. Because, like I said, when I was a little kid in the 70s or whatever, and nerding out on all this stuff, and I'm like, that lady's still alive, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And she doesn't die till 1980, I think it is, or something like that. That what she might have done with that if
Yeah.
it had been directed and focused in a positive way, is a loss to me. And it represents to me, always, I think of these isms as what robs us from
Mhm.
what she could have been, might have been in terms of women in politics and or, that particular realm. It's a loss.
Yeah. And I mean, going right into, the family connections with
Hmm.
Franklin and Eleanor
Hmm. Hmm.
that
Hmm.
came
Hmm.
right into office just as
Yep.
your book is ending. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And it's I always think she did have a thing with Eleanor in terms of, I think she was a little jealous. I think she was a
Yeah.
little jealous that Eleanor got to do the stuff that she didn't get to do
Yeah.
in that way, that she was a positive force, that she was able to do that. And they were always these very, like I said, these distant first cousins as they were. And you would think they had a similar kind of compatible circumstance and situation when Eleanor loses both
Her
of her
mother.
parents at an
Right.
early age, in terms of that. But there are always these societal, I think, expectations. And I think the thing with Franklin, I think Alice had looked at him briefly, and
Mm.
when he went to Eleanor, she was like, you know, kind of, how Alice can be, in terms of that. So they were always a little distant. But one of the things that happens, later on that I can't, this then would be a different book or whatever, is when Alice's daughter commits suicide.
Yeah, I was interested to
Yeah.
find
Yeah. That's what
out.
everybody with historical fiction looks up this
Oh,
stuff.
yeah, because I'm the
Yeah.
nerd too, right,
Yeah.
Piper?
Yeah, exactly.
And
Right.
I was like,
Yeah.
I wonder if the two daughters had any relationship. And then I read that her poor Alice's daughter was gone by the time she was like 30.
Yeah. Yeah. Alice is raising her daughter,
Yeah.
in effect. And even Fanny, Portia's daughter, had a sad end.
Oh,
Similarly, she was a little older than Paulina, but she was still too young, in her 40s when she died. So, yeah, that the answer to that question is like no.
so both mothers outlived their daughters.
Yeah, both mothers outlived their daughters, right? Exactly. And for that loss that Alice had with Paulina, that is when she and Eleanor finally come together.
Mhm.
Mm.
Interesting.
That's the force that bring them closer together,
Mhm.
is Eleanor's, feeling and connection with Alice over the death of that child. But it's not until then.
Wow.
Yeah.
I see, I think we've addressed most everything else, but I do see another one quick question going back to those lousy husbands. Was Sissy Patterson real?
Yeah, here's really like nerding out in terms of that. And actually, there were that Alice had a pack of these friends. There were actually three of them, and Nicholas had them all. That's what I didn't want to
And
say.
they would go parading
Yeah,
in
it
the
was like, yeah,
afternoon.
exactly. All of that parading it was really this question of, and almost was like, um, it could have been Alice, it could have been somebody else, and it's always this question of, was he going for Alice because this is what might benefit him politically best down the road, or what was it? But the in terms of the research I did, it just seemed, could have been any one of these chicks, in terms of that. Sissy Patterson, or is it one of the other ones? His mother was also, I'm trying to think, remember this connection. Um, she's related somehow to Oleg Cassini,
Oh,
who designed Jackie Kennedy.
design. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. More nerdy
Nerds
presidential
unite.
stuff for you in terms of that. So,
That's amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. Great. All righty. Any other questions from the
I do.
audience?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Claudia Gassler from the Scarsdale Library. I'm a programming librarian,
Hi.
and I'm in tonight to see you Pippi because I'm also interested in the book. And I was wondering, do you do like appearances? I'm having a Scarsdale Reads, which is the Black History celebration. I've been doing it for 5 years now. And I'm looking for an opening speaker. And I think you would be the perfect person for it to open my program. Do you do things like that? Like for 15, 20 minutes, just to read an excerpt from your new book, American Daughters, or something like that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Reach out to me on the internet. Yes.
And how would how would I get your contact?
What you call? Who's sponsoring this?
Yeah, Adventures by the Book.
Adventures by the Book. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Adventures by the Book website.
Okay.
Yes.
So reach out to you by that way.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
You should have the link to their site. It was in the reminder I emailed to everyone.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I saw
That'll
that.
take you to their page.
And Piper and I had the pleasure of doing a presentation a couple of years, just about 2 years ago now, down at the Atlanta Library. And a wonderful presenter. So
love libraries. Thank you so much for
Oh, excellent question to wrap up. Tell us about the book you're working on now.
Yeah, well,
or what can you tell us about the book?
Yeah, well, the whole aspect of historical fiction and where it's going and all of that direction. I do have a book that I've been working on for some time, a little more than a year, almost 18 months now, or whatever. Hopefully, like I said, it will see the light of day. I've been working on the story of Elizabeth Keckley, who is the dressmaker to Mary Lincoln, but she was so much more than that as she strode across the 19th century, like the Colossus of Rhodes. She was amazing in terms of the places where she was beyond the Lincoln connection, in terms of what she did there with that. And, you know, there is a historical fiction about her, but it came out more than 10 years ago now. And I think I can offer a different perspective on it. So that's the one I've been working on, and hopefully it will see the light of day too.
Absolutely. Well, we'll all put a note into your publisher.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Anything else from anyone in the audience? And Piper, you've been so kind and generous with your time with us this evening. We appreciate it.
Yes, of course. It's been fun.
So the link is in the chat box for Adventures by the Book, and you can find Piper Huguley's page there, and any contact information is there as well.
Yeah, and anyone that has a a personal book club, virtual or in person, you can again contact Piper through Adventures by the Book and look at calendars and see if she can join you for any of those too.
Yes, I would love it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Piper, and to everyone joining us as well. And this is being recorded and it will be available through Adventures by the Book. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Piper.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.